shut down by the enforcers when they needed to get off to a good start. Certainly a surprise from New York. Heather Gunnan becoming very physical, Hawk, something we're not used to seeing.
Well, absolutely. We said to look for Talisa Miller to use power to keep Heather Gunnan out of her game. Well, Heather Gunnan came out and used some of Talisa Miller's power and actually took it to the Rustlers. In the first jam, Ken, she scored 3 points with some physical play like that. In the last jam, she scored 2 points, and to add insult to injury, she even knocked Tink Miller on her rear end right there.
Obviously hoping to continue the big physical play. Mark D'Amato goes with his big three up front as blockers. D'Amato, Gamble, and Tim Washington. And jamming for the enforcers, Fred Eichhorn and John Morrissey. For the Texas Rustlers, up front will be Bill Daly, Brian Gallagher, and Bill Roquevert blocking. And the jammers, Chris Cheadle and Tom Chasick, not only in the starting lineup in his very first game, but the Rustlers hoping and needing an emotional lift. Turn to him starting off, and Chasick breaks free on high on the track and being pursued by Fred Eichhorn. This is Tom Chasick, number 41 out of Mountain View, California, 5'7", 191. And now Eichhorn gains the lead, and you see Chasick trying to skate, comes up behind the elbow, over the top. Great move by Chasick, sends Eichhorn over the rail, and now it's Chasick wide open. The Rustlers have not been able to score in the entire first period. Turning to Tom Chasick in his first game, and now Chasick has to deal with Mark D'Amato as D'Amato calls him up. Can Chasick's enthusiasm overcome the wily, crafty, diabolical experience of D'Amato? Now Brian Gallagher trying to come back to help his teammates. Again, the Rustlers never put a point on the board the entire first period. Gallagher with a butt block sends D'Amato whirling, and Chasick puts the first Rustler point on the board.
Well, Tom Chasick looks a little uncomfortable coming out of the chute, Ken. Obviously, all this excitement may be something he's having a hard time dealing with. And, of course, he also has quad skates on, much like does Mark D'Amato. And Tim Washington, I don't know if Tom Chasick was intimidated by the lights, the sound, and all these people, but if he was, he's got Tim Washington to deal with now. But Tom Chasick, the spiritual lift for the Rustlers, gets it done, scores a point. Look at the smile on his face, Ken. Good for him.
And how unbelievable in his very first game in the WSL. The Rustlers put him in the starting lineup, and all he does is put their very first point on the board. Now the key, Buddy Atkinson, can Texas build from this emotional lift?
Well, we're going to hope so. And I think really what they were using this Mr. Chasick for is basically a change of pace. And it looked like it worked. The score.
And now Dan Gavani out as the lead jammer, being pursued by the wild man, Chris Cheadle out of Kissimmee, Florida. One thing about Chris Cheadle, keep your eye on him. He's capable of almost anything on the track. Goes to the inside, uses the shorter track to gain the advantage, but you see the experience of Gavani, who dropped Cheadle with a big elbow. And now once again, the enforcers were the only offensive threat, as has been the case almost this entire game. D'Amato with a vicious elbow, and very quickly, New York a little unsettled by that point scored by Tom Chasick. Comes around, Gavani cuts it off, but not before putting 3 more New York points on the board.
Well, Dan Gavani and Mark D'Amato in this jam did what these New York enforcers always do. They mix it up. We saw the spiritual lift, and Mark D'Amato's not done there yet, Ken. I believe that's Brian Gallagher he's got down on the ground going after him. If there was a spiritual lift for the Rustlers in the first jam, Mark D'Amato and Dan Gavani close it in the second. And you see Mark D'Amato taking it personally, Ken. He's a blocker. He's a menace. He's just daggone ugly.
You see D'Amato in the penalty box, a one-jam penalty. I was a little bit lured into this offensive show we've seen from the enforcers. Chris Cheadle was able to get back up to his feet, evidently got by one of the enforcers. As you see the second Texas point on the board, I guess I've got to plead guilty, not really looking at Texas for any kind of scoring, but they got a second point on the board. Now, this is 46, one of their speedsters, Sigmund Williams, out of Greensboro, North Carolina, 6'1", 165, coming around, and we'll see if the Rustlers can build on it. It's 2 straight jams they've scored, but not this time, as you see a close-up of Williams as he kisses the rail. And now coming around, this is number 12, Fred Eichhorn, once again for the New York enforcers. You see the physical viciousness of Titan Tim Washington as he again leads, assists the New York enforcers for 3 more points on the board.
Well, 2 things we're seeing here, Ken, that are typical for these teams. We're seeing the New York enforcers take what could have been an emotional lift and totally slam the door on it as Titan Washington goes after. And we're seeing people like Sigmund Williams, who've been looked at all year to perform, getting out with speed but not being able to deliver, Ken. That's typical Rustler fashion.
15-2, the New York enforcers. And again, they had said they wanted to use this as a tune-up for the Founders Cup. If this is any indication, the Enforcers will be the team to beat in the upcoming Founders Day Cup tournament. And now again, the Enforcers go with what works. Again, this is Fred Eichhorn out jamming, being pursued by John Morrison, one of the Rustlers, and down goes Eichhorn, courtesy of Craig Fisher. The Fisher gets tied up in his own skates, and that leaves John Morrison wide open to try and continue to build to what may well be an insurmountable New York Enforcer lead. It's almost like the Enforcers beginning to rest Morrissey, taking some time as he now deals with Big Bill Daly. Daly, 6 feet, 200 pounds, certainly the larger of the two. But the Enforcers so far, it's been all New York from start to finish in this one. And you see, this looks like Brian Gamble spinning around to try and give Morrissey some help. And Gamble with a vicious forearm to Daly drops him. Morrissey tries to cut it off, but time had already expired on the jam.
Well, and right now, these New York Enforcers just have too many weapons for these Texas Rustlers, Ken. If you remember, earlier in the season, the New York Enforcers were in danger of losing to these Texas Rustlers, and if anybody thought that these New York Enforcers were going to look ahead one more time, they are being sadly disappointed because the New York Enforcers have come to play, and play they have.
It's all Enforcers so far. Buddy, Texas has got to do something, at least finish off this period with some kind of offense, or this is over.
So Gallagher's their man, and I think it's going to happen. Oh, boy, I'll tell you, there's a lot of banging going on from Washington, Diamato, Gamble, and now we've got the little guys doing it. Oof.
Well, Brian Gallagher right now battling it out with Dan Giovanni. Gallagher using his speed to go by and adding a quick elbow. Gallagher has got to get some points on the board as we're winding down. This will be the final jam of the period. 15-2 New York. Now Gallagher spins around Mark D'Amato. Now he's got to deal with Big Tim Washington. Washington gets tangled in escapes. 2 points for Gallagher. Goes around. Now again, one of the enforcers. That was Morrissey. What a great job by Brian Gallagher. Still trying to get more. Now he's able to get by Giovanni. Remember, that point counts. Giovanni, even though he was wearing a jammer helmet, never got out. So 4 big points for Brian Gallagher, and boy, did they need them.
Well, some players, when they get assertive and use speed, can have success against these New York Enforcers in the 5-borough lineup. Brian Gallagher is seeing some of that success, very similar to what Sam Martin, the Flame, for the Florida Sundog does. If you have speed and you skate assertively, you're able to succeed against these guys, but their intimidation always seems to get these speedsters out of their game.
There is no question the Rustlers are going to need to build on this. We'll be back with the half right after this. It's the New York Enforcers 15, the Texas Rustlers 6. Welcome back, everyone, to RollerJam Arena. I'm Ken Resnick along with Lee Revin and Buddy Atkinson. And very